If we're
Yeah, let's
30
do it.
seconds late, here we go. And we're live once again, episode 56 of Maker That Money, the podcast where we talk about turning your hobby into your jobby. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or depending on where in the world you're coming from. I am one of your hosts, Pooch of Repkord. With me, as always, my trusty co-host, Mr. Andrew Mayhall, over there on the right side, my left, your right. And our special guest for today, Mr. Josh Manley, co-owner of CADclass.org. Josh, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the pod this morning. How are you, my friend?
Thanks so much.
Uh,
Yeah, no, doing great here. It's a little hot in Sacramento, so
I
you
know.
know,
See, now you're you're a fellow Sacramentite. I don't know what to say that.
yeah,
So I'm in the greater Sacramento area as well, and we met through some networking locally. And I know you're new to the area and stuff too. But we went immediately from cold to hot, as we are known to do. So we go to from freezing to sneezing to sweating just in a very short period of time, and then repeat. That's the weather cycle here. But welcome. You are co-owner of CADclass.org. Why don't you tell everybody what that is and give us a quick background, if you would.
yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I love doing these types of things and hopefully sharing what I know and giving some value to the folks listening. So, I am, like you said, I recently moved to Sacramento from Southern California. I actually started in Ohio. We can go way back in the journey, but I'll keep
Oh,
it brief.
wow.
Started in Ohio, so like grew up in Ohio, got out of there, moved to New York City. That's where I started my first business at tutoring, science tutoring,
Ooh.
math, chemistry, test prep, all kinds of things like that. I had a background in science. I had done science in labs. I have a couple publications, and
Oh, he's
just thought I
published. We're
kind of
really
help
upping our
kids
game
make
now
their
with the
own.
published
Yeah.
Yeah.
people
So
here.
then I lived in New York City for about 6 years. My girlfriend's from SoCal, so she's like, "Hey, you want to go to SoCal?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm about done with this." So about 4 years into running my science tutoring company, I don't know what it is. I think a lot of makers can relate to this, but I just was like, I need to make stuff. I need to make stuff. Like I'm tired of talking about theories and yeah, I love science. I could talk about it all day, but like I want to get my hands on stuff. So 4 years in, I started
Yeah.
annoying all my friends. Like, hey, I need to figure out how to like make stuff. Can I apprentice with somebody who does woodworking? Like, I need to figure this stuff out. I had a handy father and a handy stepfather, and my whole family makes stuff, and it just I'd kind of shunned it until that point, and it caught up with me. It's like, no, we're here to do this. So
Nice.
so 4 years into running my business, I was like, I need to figure out how to make stuff. I'm like carving wine corks with a knife and
Oh, wow.
just like in my tiny little studio in New York City, because you live in a closet in New York.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I was just like, I was starting to get my hands on stuff, but didn't really know where to go. There was a couple fab labs there that weren't great at the time. They
Okay.
had like a drill press and a 3D printer and called themselves a fab lab, which is fine.
Sure.
I support that, but it wasn't quite for me.
Yeah.
So then I got an opportunity to move to Southern California, and I wound my business down and I said, I'm starting fresh out in California, and I want to do two things. I want to teach. I still love teaching, and I want to make stuff. And my friends were all like, yeah, so what are you going to do? And I'm
So,
like, I don't know. I want to teach and I want to make things. So I got out to Southern California, kind of noodled around for a bit, and then started to kind of hear about this makerspace movement
yeah.
and Googled it. And it turns out one of the top makerspaces in the country was a 20-minute bike ride for me. So I'm like, all right, like dropped what I was doing that day. I rode my bike over there, took a tour of the facility, 30,000 square feet. It's called Urban Workshop.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
was like, oh yeah, this is it.
This is
Like
the one.
this is the thing. This is
Yeah.
what I've been looking for.
Yeah.
And I knew it like right away. So then I went from touring the facility to like pitching for a job, basically as I'm walking around, like, oh hey, I can like
Yeah.
do these things, right? And so I just sort of persisted and came back in a second time and caught the owner was there, Steve, and I caught him when he was there, and I said, hey, how do I get involved? Like I've got a background in teaching. I don't necessarily know how to make things yet. I said, but I'm pretty motivated to figure it out.
Sure.
What are you doing? It turns out like the day that I approached him, one of his employees that was running a program called Mobile Makerspace, where we take truck and trailer out and teach kids everywhere,
Yeah.
had quit. And he's like, actually, why don't you interview with the program manager? And
That's fortuitous. Yeah.
he's kind of like, what can
Yeah.
you do? And I'm like, well, I've ridden my bike for years. I can fix my bike.
There you go.
you know, uh, I'm like, I said, I don't know. Not a lot. I've built a couple small things, but I'm motivated to learn. I'll figure it out. And
And that's
fortunately for me,
and that's the key, and that's the common thread. So we hit it
Mhm.
off right away on multiple force. You're a multiple, entrepreneur through and through. Had multiple ventures, but obviously that maker spirit is alive and well in you. That thirst for being hands on, to learn. A lot of times, it's just a willingness to figure it out. Right? It's not about what you know. It's not book smarts. It's like, hey, how do we get in here? How do we figure stuff out? How do we fail? How do we fail fast? All that kind of stuff, and we love that. And I, like you, came up. My first space outside of my garage was in a co-working space in a makerspace, and so they're near and dear to me. Andrew, I know you've had experience with local spaces where you
Mhm.
are as well. So we're going to get into all of that. So today's topic is making the business cases for makerspaces, because I know that just I got to have something that rolls off the tongue. But part of the challenge of it as well is, I don't know about you guys, but I've come across a number of them that, the intentions are good, but the execution is poor. And ultimately, there's been a lot of failure in
Mhm.
that space. Not all, there are success stories, but we want to get into that. And Josh, I know you have some experience now, having been involved, doing consulting, helping setting up. You worked your way up to operating a makerspace as well. I probably cut you off before you even got to that point.
yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I took a job, basically started, I volunteered for a couple of weeks and then I got hired part time. And then I just threw myself at it as hard as I could. So I'm at home, I'm making stuff after work. I'm like learning from a fire hose. I mean,
Yeah.
it was the best learning experience of my whole life.
Yeah.
And I studied pharmacy, right? Like I studied some hard stuff, but like this just took the cake. And it's like I walk into Home Depot and there's a wall of 3,000 screws, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm screwed. Like,
Hey-oh.
yeah, I got to use that one. But I'm like, this is completely
Get out.
overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is all this stuff? Like, so I start and then I get a full-time position there and then I take over the youth program and then eventually I run the whole education department.
Yeah.
And that's 1,000 kids a year and 3,000 adults a year and
Wow.
250 different classes, wood, metal, welding, lasers, 3D printing, everything else like that. So it's a really robust program. Probably, I haven't seen, and I've been searching, I haven't seen a lot of youth programs that can really compete with their
This is
kind of
urban
breadth
maker,
and
you said?
depth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked my way up, ended up managing the facility during COVID, which that was
Wow. Yeah.
the
Crazy.
Hardest time, right?
Man,
horrendous challenge, right? As if maker spaces aren't hard enough to run and
I
operate. Like
know.
anybody who
Yep.
runs these things, there's sort of two camps of people, right? The people that run them and are like, oh my God, this is really hard. And then the camp of people that are like, this is the greatest idea ever. I wish I would have thought of this. And my response to that was always like, no, you don't. Like
Yeah.
this is
You think,
brutal. So anyway, so then
yeah.
I worked my way up to actually running that space. And that was where I started to come up with this idea of CAD class. Running the space, we're teaching CAD classes, we're teaching computer software based classes. One of the things that in-person maker spaces do really well
Yeah,
is get your hands on stuff, the
absolutely.
physical
Mhm.
stuff, right?
Right.
But as you know, like a lot of making, especially in the 3D printing world, you need to know how to CAD model.
Yep.
If it's Arduino, you need to know some programming.
Yeah.
A lot of it is drag and drop, but you've got to know enough to be dangerous in those.
Mhm.
And then if you're trying to develop a product, you need to know Photoshop and Illustrator. And so there's this heavy software side of things that I think in general makerspaces don't touch upon very often. So I just started to have this noodling around in my head, like, oh, wow, we're teaching a CAD class. People come in here for 3 hours, they learn a little bit, and they definitely go home and forget it all.
Yeah.
Like YouTube's got to be better at teaching CAD than we are. And I think that was, I think that was true. But for a lot of people, they're like, at least we can get started here. So
Yeah.
so I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
CAD class, and my significant other and I moved up here to Sacramento. Um, so I had to say goodbye to that job. And when I did, that's where I met my business partner Jake, who's amazing, and I'll go into him a little bit later too. But
Sure.
the two of us were kind of like, well, let's do CAD class better. Let's just figure out a way to teach this online, and let's figure out a way to do this so that it's fun and sequential and the projects are interesting and they're relevant to what you actually make in the shop. And like, there's
Yeah.
got to be a better way to do this. And so when I wound that down, when I wound working that down, we just threw ourselves into CAD class full time. Uh,
what I love about that really quick is,
Hmm.
and Andrew, I think you'll probably agree with me. CAD is so foundational to so much of making a lot of
Hmm.
the time. Like
Yep.
it's the napkin sketch, but obviously on the computer a lot of times it's a starting point. It's the like I said, it's the foundation of a lot of this. And so I think the fact that you identified that early on and said there's a need here, and I kind of giggled when you said, oh, YouTube has got to be better at this because, when we were talking, it's like, well, yeah, there's a ton of resources, but you want to talk about drinking from a fire hose and then you don't know like
Yeah.
what stuff's dated and there's a
yeah,
million
your
different
fire hose is broken. It's
tools.
coming out the sides,
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's all over the
Hmm.
place. It's all over the place.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's a great, and we're gonna dig in a little bit deeper. I want to pause for a second. We're gonna put you on the spot, Josh. You're great at
Do
thinking
it.
on your feet. One of the things that we do at the top of the show every week, we are a positive people here. We try to focus on a win for the week, so everybody gets to share, and everybody in the chat. First of all, I haven't acknowledged our chat. I'm remiss in that. I apologize.
Oh no.
A lot of good faces, some new faces. Big Jano, good to see you here. A lot of our friends from Rocky Mountain RepRap Festival that we were just at are tuned in
Yep.
this morning. That's awesome. Thank you. Uh,
Hmm.
as always, feel free to put questions in the chat if you have questions for us or Josh. We welcome them. We also have the Maker That Money hotline if you want to call in and chat with us in person. If you're a brave soul, want to do so, we can accommodate you there as well. But for this week, we are going to do wins for the week. I'm going to start with Andrew so that Josh gets a second to think
You
about
always
like
start with me.
what's something positive. Do you want me to start? I can start. I never
No,
start.
no, it's all good.
That's fine. I do always start because I use that time to think about mine as well. So, one positive thing that's happened in your life, if you're in the chat, please share a win that you've had as well. And it can be anything. It can be personal life. It can be business life. Just something good that happened to you so that we're focusing on some good energy. Andrew, what do you got?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna steal the one from like last week, where going out to Rocky Mountain
Expand.
RepRap Festival.
Expand.
Yeah, so that was it was awesome. Being able to hang out with everyone there, and kind of feel energized now that I'm back. Here at Gloop, we're working on some really cool projects for the next display, the next show that we're going to be at, which I believe should be Murph. Where we will be boothing. So
Boothin'.
hopefully, if things are going great right now, we're going to be able to keep forward and keep pushing and get those projects going.
That's
So
fantastic. All right, Josh, what's something good that happened to you this week?
We got our book off of the editor's desk,
That's
so
huge.
so we are
wow,
now in full on put it in InDesign mode.
Oh,
So
rad. Okay.
yeah,
Now, what
really,
does that
really,
mean for those of us that haven't published in the past?
it means pain is what it
It means
means. It
pain.
means
Well,
you
that
get to
doesn't sound
learn
like a win.
more. You get to learn more software, right? So
Okay.
you get to learn more.
cool.
So basically, we wrote the book in Google Docs and then
Okay.
transferred that to Word because we were having issues managing the photos in Google Docs, and then only to realize like, oh, we're going to need to put this actually in a separate program for publishing called Adobe InDesign, which there's many
Yeah.
programs that do it.
Sure. But
Um,
an actual page
so
layout program. Yeah.
page
I
layout,
came from the
exactly,
print space, so
publishing.
I'm very familiar. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we're really excited about it because we got it. We give ourselves a deadline of June 1st to have it out and live on Amazon and in bookstores, and for those of it, we'll have some free copies of it as a PDF as well.
Awesome.
Um, but we got that
Awesome.
off the editor's desk, and we're just really excited about it. So
Now, just
major win.
really quick, is this meant to be like a companion to some of your online video content? So it's kind
Yeah,
of for those that want
we
to.
took
Okay.
we took the 28 projects that we built originally as the video course, and
Yeah.
we made them a book.
Yeah.
And it's
Wow.
exactly the same. And the thought was like, hey, some people learn best by book, some people learn best by video. We've got actually, there is a kind of unique aspect. I haven't heard about a lot of people doing this, and I want to like yell about it because I think it's really interesting. And that is each project in the book is actually linked to a Discord server. So
Oh,
it
that's
has like, if
cool.
you're working through it
Oh,
and you get stuck, which you will, because learning Fusion is hard, right? So we're
Yeah.
teaching Fusion 360
Okay.
CAD
Okay.
software.
Yeah.
But if you get stuck, then you just pop into the Discord server and it's linked to the project you're working on. And
that's really clever.
I
I
like
haven't
that.
seen other books do this, and I can't really figure out why. But like, hey, if there's anybody out there that's thinking about publishing like a how-to or a step-by-step tutorial book, really recommend like building that that's so, and we already have that as a part of the online class. So the folks in the online class get stuck working through the Saturn V rocket or building the skateboard. They
Yeah.
can just hop onto the server, get their questions answered immediately by us or the community. Often it's the community of people, right?
Right.
Share a screenshot. Here's where I'm stuck. What's going wrong?
Right.
So it's just like kind of a new way to think about books and book publishing. So I don't want to plug this too long because I want to talk maker spaces. But yeah, I think anybody else thinking about writing a
That's
tutorial book, like
incredible, though.
put discussion forums
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah, you got a lot of irons in the fire. That's awesome. For if you guys haven't already gone to check it out, and there's a lot of people that love Fusion. I use Fusion. There's always new stuff to learn, and I love that model of tying in Discord. I think that's a great idea. Check out cadclass.org. A lot of cool little functional tutorials, like you said, that tie into other passions. If you're into rocketry, if you're into skating, like there's something for everybody on there, which is just nice. So well done on that front, Josh, and congrats on getting off the editor's desk. That's a big step. For me, I'm gonna go with something a little bit more that I've been like checking a bucket list thing off. I've been, as Andrew mentioned, we just got back from Denver. Josh, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to go into these RepRap festivals. It's traditionally like in the 3D printing space, but lots of maker centric stuff. It's not just 3D printing. Somewhat like a maker fair, but a little bit more specific to 3D printing. So this was the inaugural one out of Denver. The guys that put that on did just a great job. It exceeded expectations. Attendance blew everyone away. It was fantastic. I'd been to Denver a number of times, and when I think Denver, I think Rocky Mountains and all that stuff. Except for if you've ever been to Denver, most of where you are is like the flatlands, right? And so it's like you're teased by the Rocky Mountains, but you're not really in the Rocky Mountains unless you drive about an hour to the west. And so my buddy Stefan from CNC Kitchen and I said, you know what? We're going to take this opportunity and actually go to the Rockies. And so we drove out to Estes and did this cool little peak-to-peak drive. And it was we experienced all seasons like basically in one. You're driving through this canyon, then you're going up and there's snow-capped mountains, and like it was actually snowing. And then we came down into Boulder, and I'd never been to Boulder before. So really cool college town.
Awesome.
Neat vibe there. And then we did an actual hike in a little place called the Flatirons, which was just great. So it was like, good hiking, like good moderate, good exercise. You get some good elevation, some bouldering at the top, a lot of fun. So I can now check off saying like I have been to the Rocky Mountains. That is my win.
That's
for the week.
Nice.
Love the mountains, especially the Rockies.
I do. Man, I do too. So, and Stefan was like, "Oh, we're not going to get altitude sickness." So, no, I don't think it's quite that high. You hear the Rocky Mountain High. I mean, it is a mile-high city, and then we're going up, but it's not like when you go, visit the Andes or Machu Picchu or something like that, where it's like crazy high elevation. But that was good. Some wins in the chat. Something good. Royal Nomi, good to see you, Nomi. Something good this week. Met with another organization that she assists with, making kids happy, basically donating prints to underprivileged children in the area. That is awesome.
Super special.
Love reading that. Love finding good 3D printing options that bring joy to children and to others. That is good work you're doing there, Nomi. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, let's try to drive it back in. Last bit, call to action. I thank all of you guys for being with us. If you haven't already, please do the like, subscribe thing, tell a friend. We love maker entrepreneurship stories that can encapsulate all kinds of stuff. I know Andrew and I got our start in kind of 3D printing and Makerspace, but I've expanded. We do laser cutting. We do all of that stuff like Josh. I love working with my hands. I think we all have the common thread of we just want to make cool stuff. And it's pretty special when you're able to take your hobby, your passion, and make a living out of it. And there's a million different ways you can go about doing that, whether you're educating like Josh is, whether you're running a makerspace, having your own makerspace, whether you're making products, lots of different ways, lots of different ground to cover. If you're interested in being on the podcast in the future, feel free to send us an email. We now have an email, mtm@repkord.com. You can reach us that way, or any of our social media handles. We're all very active on Twitter and the others as well. So please feel free to reach out and share your story. We love talking about maker entrepreneurship and the challenges that presents.
Mm-hmm.
This week, we're talking specific about something, like I said, that's near and dear to us, makerspaces. So, Andrew, I want to give you an opportunity because we've been kind of stealing the spotlight a little too much here. I want you to talk about your experience with makerspaces, what you think of when you think of it, because we got to define, what does that mean? That's actually kind of a broad term. There are a lot of different types of makerspace. What is your experience with makerspaces, and what do you think of when you hear it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So my first experience with makerspaces was actually here in St. Louis, and it wasn't really a makerspace, more so what they called a hackerspace. This was where basically a bunch of individuals just got together. They're like, "Hey, can we lease out a workshop all together and put all of our junk there, and we
Right.
can all just hang
Yeah.
out and make cool stuff?"
Right. Right.
And these were people who like had engineering day jobs, or were tinkerers and makers, right? But this was back in, I think, 2008, 2009.
Okay.
So quite a few years ago. But in St. Louis area, there wasn't really any maker spaces. Now St. Louis was manufacturing hub. We made stuff all the time, but there was no like space you could go to, like, oh, hey, I've got this idea. I need access to equipment. It was just, you knew people who had access to equipment. And, it was just like this hacker space kind of formed out of,
Right.
hey, we have equipment. Like, let's just share it with each other.
So kind of
I've
like
got a
the
laser. I've got a
co-op
3D
model.
printer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
the commune,
So,
the maker commune.
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah, I've seen
And
those.
I could remember, I could remember that it was so disorganized because
Oh God.
literally, just imagine a bunch of people just getting together and then like leasing this rundown building, like completely, like, just, it's terrible. Like, there's no floors, there's no walls, like it's just like construction zone. And they're like, oh yeah, here's our woodworking area, and it consists of like a table saw and maybe a bandsaw or whatever. And then they have like 3D printers, like, and back in the day that was like the cupcake CNCs and stuff.
Yeah.
Just starting. MakerBot was just getting started.
Yeah.
And like DIY things all over the place, like half finished projects on the walls. Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, that's like endearing, I think, to a lot of us,
Yep.
but at the same time, like the business owner in me is like mortified by it, because it's just like, how can you get anything done? There's like safety but again, they're never the same thing to everyone, right? Like, that's part of the challenge of it, when you're trying to manage a space and people have a different expectation of what it should be. Hey, I just want to come and have some beers and walk around and talk about cool stuff and strike up conversations. And there's other people that are like, no, I'm here to learn, and I have a limited amount of time, or they're there because it's they're trying to get a project done, or get a business product off the ground. So Josh, you've done a number of these. First of all, what are you thinking of? What kind of versions of maker spaces have you seen and had experience with? Go.
Yeah. No, so all kinds. So the first one that I worked at was a for-profit, privately owned. One person owned it. There's no outside funding makerspace, right? But you had some of the early makerspaces that were VC funded, right? So you had Tech Shop was the big example, right? Let's throw a bunch of money into this because this is the coolest idea ever. Everybody really loves it, right?
Right.
I do teach one class a week at the Sacramento City College Makerspace, teaching their CNC course, and also working with CAD class with their students.
Okay.
So there's the Makerspace that's privately owned. I do volunteer and spend some time advising the board at a place called Community Shop Class, which is nonprofit. Yeah.
It's a nonprofit, or
it's a nonprofit makerspace.
Okay.
I do consulting a little bit with some for-profit makerspaces. I built out the Mosaic, the Museum of Science and Curiosity, has a makers facility inside for their kids program. Now it'll probably be for the adults too.
Sure.
But I built that facility out for them. So there's a lot of different models. They exist inside of that, because this is kind of how I think of it. Like, they exist inside of institutions, and they're institutionally funded.
Yes.
They are privately funded. They are nonprofit and sometimes funded by grants, but a lot of times just kind of somebody started it and then started like kind of asking for money, which is Community Shop Class here in Sacramento. That's how they work.
Okay.
So, and then there's the kind of the co-op. Somebody has a garage, somebody has a little space. I
Right.
actually had somebody in Utah reach out to me. They wanted to put a small makerspace in. They wanted me to run it. They offered to give me a building for free for 2 years to do it. I'm like, I don't want to.
Thank
It
you, but
sounds
no.
great.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
sounds really good.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um, and then there's military makerspaces, right? So they're
Oh,
innovation
that's a
labs,
different
innovation
one.
studios. They're
Yeah.
inside of middle schools, high schools, grade schools. There's
Hmm.
libraries, right? Libraries are another one. And
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
so there's just inside of each of these categories, there's just a huge number of different ways to go about it. So I think when you're
Hmm.
making the business case for a makerspace, it very much depends on what style of makerspace you are. And I
S-
know I just chatted with Dale Deutery yesterday from Make Magazine, and this is a conversation we had. It's like
Yeah.
we almost need a classification for what it is.
You
Is like
you totally
what
do.
like a word
Right.
for the
Hmm.
different
Yeah.
Well,
types of makerspace.
that's what I was gonna say. It's like the word
Hmm.
itself sometimes is almost tainted. Like I think it evokes different emotions for different people, right? And first of
Hmm.
all, tell us in the chat what kind of maker spaces you've been around, what you think works, what doesn't. We want to hear what everybody has been involved in because, like you said, it's a broad thing. But when I hear the term makerspace, there's almost like I hate to say it, but that term like evokes more the co-op, disorganized, just
Hmm.
like it's hard to
Yep.
take it seriously. And I don't know if that's just me wearing my business hat a little bit too much, or I'm biased because of my personal experience with like a couple failed maker spaces. What is it that you guys classify? So I think there's people that are trying to rebrand. The Sun Turtle
Hmm.
Camper is talking about a fab lab, right? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
we hear
exactly.
different
Another
terms,
model.
or hacker
Yeah,
space, or people are trying to
yeah.
like
Yep.
make it sound a little bit more sexy, or maybe that defines more of a subset of what is being made or what its purpose is, right? So there's any different number of ways we can cut this pie up. What do you guys think
Hmm.
when you hear the term makerspace, and is that I mean, it's the same thing with maker, right? Maker just means
Hmm.
such a broad thing, and I think it evokes a hobbyist mentality for me. It's hard
Hmm.
to think of that as a professional entity. I don't know. Am I alone in that? What do you guys think?
I mean, I agree. In so many ways, and I think it's probably like you mentioned, Pooch. It kind of tainted from past maker spaces that had come up and then failed.
Mm,
So like for instance, St. Louis got a tech shop. I think it was about 5 years ago,
okay.
and it made it about a year, maybe,
Oh
and
wow,
then
that's
tech
not
shop
good.
just went
A
completely
year.
belly up, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it just that was it. And I even remember like the tech shop, at our local area was so kind of mismanaged and misrun and not organized in any way in which it made sense. And like it got really confusing, like, oh well, how do you book out the equipment? Like all of the equipment was free for anyone to book out for any period of time,
Right.
but people weren't there, and then you couldn't actually use the equipment,
And
and
who owns it
it
when it
got
break or gets
it,
broken or somebody's not cleaning
hmm
up after the like there has to be somebody to own it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's where the
yeah. And
co-op
so
model seems to fail big time, in my opinion.
mhm. And what's funny though is that we have this hacker space that's still around today, and it's still thriving, and it started all of those years ago.
Okay.
And it's just again kind of a co-op, but it's more of a everyone kind of mutually respects each other's equipment that they have in there, and that there's kind of this accountability that
Okay.
goes in where I think it's kind of missing in some cases. Now we've
Mm,
since had a new makerspace come in, in kind of in the vacuum that Tech Shop left, and it's much more well organized and run. And
mm,
it is the embodiment of what I think now a makerspace is, where it's a commercial entity that you go in, you rent the tools for the time. There are classes there that you can learn, but I think there are absolutely areas where they could expand because as we were talking earlier in the show, and Josh was mentioning, like so much of being a maker involves learning, but you
mm.
have to have a foundation,
Yeah.
and most of that foundation isn't very well taught to these people,
Mm.
and then they're just like kind of fumbling around figuring it out. And it's just it's kind of like a place where you go and play almost now,
Mm,
instead of actually being a place where you could go and turn, ideas into products.
yeah. Yeah,
Unfortunately.
I get that. So,
Yeah, I mean, I
what do
think
you think, Josh? Yeah, what does
yeah,
maker mean to you,
I
makerspace?
think I agree and I disagree some. Like it's like it some of these facilities, I think the best facilities that I've been in manage to combine both, where you have creatives that are in
Hmm.
there that are tinkering and hacking around and doing really wacky, fun, weird stuff. I think that really gets us excited, you know?
Hmm.
And then you've got
Hmm.
legitimate businesses that are also run out of it. And the trick is to try to find the balance, which is probably an impossible trick,
It
right?
is, yeah.
But the term maker, I think I've thought a lot about the term maker. My biggest issue with it is actually that when you tell people, like when I used to tell people I run education at a makerspace, the biggest thing was, what the heck is that? What is that? And so I
Hmm.
think the same thing, like hackerspace has, unfortunately, at least to me, like a somewhat negative connotation in the
Hmm.
general society. Hackers something that's like below the surface,
Sure.
it's like doing bad things. So I think even though I like it because it gives me that grungy sense of like what must have
Uh-huh.
happened in the most innovative facilities in the world,
Right.
um, I think the general population hears it and they think kind of like well, what sort of nefarious stuff is going on around there. Um, so
Yeah.
Hmm.
I honestly like I don't love the term maker and I don't love the term maker space, but I've never been able to come up with a better one.
I
And
know,
I
right?
thought a lot about it. So I'm gonna stick with it and just say it is what it is. And just like makers evolve, the term maker
Hmm.
will evolve along with it. And as those facilities get better, I think it'll kind of a rising boat raises you right, or a rising tide raises all the boats. It's like
Yeah.
it would just kind of this is where we are, and the next 2, 3 cycles of iteration around this will just be better because everybody's learned from
Sure.
everybody else. So I don't know. I could ramble on about that for a while. Tough term. I don't know what to do about it.
I'm
But
so with
Yeah.
you though. It's like it's the best term that we've been able to find because we want to be inclusive and encapsulate a lot of the things, but a lot of the challenge of the space, like we said, is because we're trying to be everything to everyone that it makes it so amorphous. It makes it hard to focus from a business standpoint. That's a really tough thing, right? Like it is not easy to be everything. A lot of the common wisdom we hear in business is like you need to
yeah,
focus on one or two.
one thing.
Focus, right? and
Yeah.
and you live or
Yep.
die by organization. Let's go a little deeper on the business side of
Perfect.
things because the way these are funded,
Yep.
okay, where's the
Hmm.
money coming from? Is
Yeah.
oftentimes where these things seem to live or die, right? And so the ones that I see
Yep.
that go on oftentimes have a large institution tied to them or repeat grant funding or stuff like that because it's counting on people to just come in and pay memberships and all that stuff is a totally different model and it's hard and you're going to have to deal with turnover, and as we know in business, turnover, whether it's with employees or with
Hmm.
customers, is not a good thing. You want to retain, that's why we see a lot of these like monthly, trying to retain people for monthly subscriptions and stuff like that.
Yep.
But obviously that's a different model. Josh, I'll start with you on this one. What are some of the different business models that you've seen, and what has worked better? What hasn't worked? What do you think? What do you think in that space?
Oh yeah, lots of thoughts here. So
Yeah,
for starters, the space that I ran was 4 pillars of revenue. I would call it. It
four pillars.
was
What are they?
memberships. It was memberships. It was I split these into 2 categories because I think they're different enough. But adult classes, youth classes, and then storage. So the facility
Ah.
storage
Oh, that's
actually
interesting.
paid the rent, right? So there was enough people renting storage inside the facility to pay the rent of the facility, which was really interesting. And I don't think many spaces do that very well.
Uh huh.
So that was
Hmm.
the 4 pillars of revenue there. But I've since thought more about it. There's a couple more, right? There's grants and grant funding.
Sure.
There's institutions and institutional funding,
Yep.
and then there's
Hmm.
and also just like kind of the institutional that they're just like, oh, we'll pay for all of it. It's kind of a loss leader, but we know that we're going to be training the next generation of people, or it's going
Right.
to be good for our business,
Hmm.
or whatever there. So
Right.
one pillar of revenue that I'll plug CAD class for. I mentioned to you before we started this was one thing that makerspaces, like we said before, are very good at in general is like getting your hands on stuff,
Mm-hmm.
machines,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you're actually making stuff, physically doing it. It's hard to find anywhere else to do that. But one of the things that they don't do very well is teach online classes, and the economics of online classes are mind-blowing, right? Because you've got the whole world
Hmm.
as your audience, and there
Right.
are, like CAD class, there actually are some classes that you can offer online to the world.
Right.
But if you are operating a makerspace, I 100% guarantee you're overwhelmed.
Yes.
There's too much to do.
Yes.
So if you try to
Yep.
branch out and actually do your own online courses, the likelihood that succeeds is really low. And I know because I'm spending my full time trying to build an online course and an online community and everything that goes with it. And I know there's no way I could have made that a possibility if I were still operating, right? And that's, I think, another side of this is like makerspaces need good operators. They need people who get things done and stay organized and charge people correctly and follow up on failed payments and do the grunt work. It's not easy. It's not fun. You get into this because you're a maker and you realize 0% of your time is making. It's 100% trying to keep the whole thing from burning
Administrative.
down.
Yep.
So
Yep.
the CAT class model that I wanted to build in fairly early was, if you're a makerspace, if you're operating something like this, let us teach your CAD classes and we'll pay you a commission on sales. You have to do nothing except say, take this class. You don't have to hire the teacher. You don't have to have them on site. You don't have to worry about canceling classes because only one student showed up, and that's not right. That doesn't generate enough revenue for you to justify it. So that was one of the early things that we thought was exciting was, hey, what if we could just pay people to, like, finding clients and getting referral business is tough, and we're going to have to advertise somehow. So instead of spending money on advertising on Google Ads, why don't we just pay makerspaces to send students our way, and we'll send them through a world-class program. They'll get more value from the equipment in the facility. They're more likely to stay because we taught them like in depth a skill that's very difficult to teach. So that's kind of another pillar, is like, I think there's actually a lot of room for partnering with other online course creators. CNC Kitchen's another example. I think he does online classes, right? Does he do anything, or
I don't think he actually does classes per se, but
but anything that can be something online, I think exploring those partnerships and just saying, how do we run this and operate this? And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Like, we can handle 100% of the work, or you can still have a private cohort that shows up to your facility. We just run it on the back end. You run through our materials. You don't have to develop the class, right? So that's kind of a newer thought. I'm starting to get in with some maker spaces and different facilities to offer this now, and getting some really good results from it, because now the people have the skills. But
I love this. No, let me stop you here for a second. There's a couple of things that just really resonate with me on that, and it reminds me of like when a lot of just institutions of learning went to like e-learning. COVID kind of created that and stuff. So obviously, like you said, your reach is bigger, but there's a couple of things that really jump out. Right? It's like, get out of our own way. Like, we run into these problems, and like you said, when these facilities are actually being run by makers, historically, stereotypically, these are people that do not like admin work. They don't want to be business owners. They don't want to do that. And so if you give them an opportunity to leverage something that already exists, but more so, it helps with the sales and the marketing and the outreach too. So it's like potentially there's branding opportunity, and so that can drive people coming in. So when you're tied to a brick and mortar location, we've seen time and time again, like, you're really dependent on people keep coming in that door, or referrals and stuff like that. This is a great means of potential outreach.
And revenue.
And revenue. Yeah.
You get paid and don't administer.
And don't worry about the admin stuff.
Brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
Yeah. No, it's a good one. The other one, I don't know if you mentioned, maybe it kind of falls in the storage thing, but it's like, I've seen a couple, one I was at had co-working space as another revenue model.
That's a very big deal. Very big deal.
But I'll tell you this, it posed an interesting challenge, because now you're mixing and the way they did it was, upstairs was a bunch of offices, and then downstairs was the entire makerspace. And so, ideally you could have kind of a little bit of separation and close your office door, if you want to go head down and work. But when you're mixing the professionals, and I've talked to, we met through a friend that experienced this as well. There's a large brain drain often that happens from these makerspaces when you go in there with the idea of starting a business, because you realize really quickly, like, my business cannot depend on machines that may or may not be running, may or may not be available. And if I need to focus on working, I can't have the guy that just wants to be there and hanging out and chatting with me all day, and picking apart my design and telling me why I should be doing it different or better.
Why it won't work.
Right. So that you're mixing a really weird subset potentially. Like I I have maker. I love doing stuff, but as I've grown my business, unfortunately, I have less time to just make for fun, and more time I'm thinking about how do I make money and keep this flywheel turning.
Yeah.
But that goes back to like you're mixing. I don't know if I'd say oil and water, but very opposing intents. I don't know. Have you experienced any of that with people coming in and trying to like kickstart their business using the Makerspace equipment kind of thing?
Tons of it. Yeah, no, I saw some, I mean, most people that came into our space wanted to start their own business. So we
Yep.
did this thing called success coaching,
Yep.
where I just say, what are you hoping to achieve here?
Yeah.
And how can I help? Right? Like
Yeah.
let me try to help you navigate this maze of there's everything here, maze, like world of possibility, but how do we help you do it?
Right.
And I would say 80 to 90% wanted to start a business of some sort. So yeah, definitely a lot of folks wanting to do that. I'll say, I think I'll add something to, I totally forgot about the co-working side of it.
Yeah.
Definitely a number of spaces utilize that.
Okay.
It gets really tough because you're already running a handful of very distinctly different types of facilities, right? You are a manufacturing facility.
Yep.
So you need all the maintenance and stuff that goes along with running a manufacturing facility.
Yep.
You are in some ways, if you're running youth programs, you're in some ways like a daycare, right? You are very much responsible for taking care of folks' kids. If you're running adult classes, now you're an education facility, right? And if you're running memberships, well, now you're kind of like a gym. You're a membership-based organization. So you are running so many types of businesses in this that if you think the solution is to add another type of business,
yeah,
I get worried. I'm like, I'm not sure.
To put it
I'm not
nicely.
sure the people that are actually on the ground operating this are going to be able to operate anything with any real purpose, unless you have a person dedicated to it, or a whole thing dedicated to it. And I could be wrong here. I'm sure people run more businesses inside their business, but I was always thinking, we got to simplify this. This is out of control. This is like, this is just very, very difficult to run because it's so many distinctly different things. And the fear was always, like bridging out to the online class world. It was like, we filmed every video we had, every class we did for the youth program.
Yep.
We filmed when we shut down for COVID. And so it was like, facilities closed, and we had high hopes of like, well, maybe we can run an online class. But then as everything came back and we're trying to reopen the facility, it was like, absolutely not. There's just no way. There's no way. We can't pull this off. We can't even keep our heads above water. We can't even answer the phones fast enough. So I think it's just outrageous. What do you think?
Andrew, why don't you jump in here? Because I think we struggle. That's a fundamental business thing that we struggle with, and it's a particular challenge for makers where it's like when things aren't going well, we just start. We go back to relying on let's make this, let's make this, let's make this, and
that's exactly.
And you're getting away from that focus, and now you're just throwing shit against the wall and seeing what's sticking, and nothing. You're not doing anything particularly well. I still struggle with that. And I don't know about you.
I kind of say it's like flailing when you're drowning, right? And instead of, focusing on, making for sure you're treading water, you're thrashing about, trying to like, okay, hey, if I just kick my arm or, kick my legs and flail my arms faster, I'm going to keep my head above the water.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's what we saw here in, kind of the St. Louis area maker spaces for a while. And in so many cases, they're still like, I always question that whole model in general. Like, I love the idea of Makerspace, but what I find is for our business as we continue growing, like we're, working on new products, and with those new products, we have to like prototype packaging or prototype, all of these other things. And we could go to a Makerspace and leverage their tools and their equipment. But the problem for us is like, that is such a disruption to our daily operation, like leaving our space, going and doing these things, where it's honestly more cost effective for us to actually kind of internalize a lot of these things. Even if we're only going to use our laser cutter for, like a week at a time every 6 months, it's less disruptive for us to go out and do that. And I've seen, on that note, like with, just again, being kind of a maker myself, like so many other people have like, oh, well, hey, I've got this business or I've started this business, and maybe I can have, like I could monetize my equipment, in
Yep.
some way.
Yep.
And then you start like getting way outside of
Yeah.
what your focus is. And I feel like that's what essentially a makerspace has become. It's like, these makers are like, well, hey, I have this equipment, how can I monetize this? And it's like, well, I can, charge a monthly fee and people can come in and use it. And then it's like, well, I got to do repairs and maintenance, so now I got to charge a little bit of time for that machine. And oh, people don't want to lug their products in or their projects in and then back out, so maybe I could charge for storage.
Right.
It's just like all of these like little things that add up over time.
Which you'll, and the more that you lay on there, the more admin, stuff you gotta go enforce all that stuff. It's so funny because I think that it's such a common journey when you're new to this whole thing. There's a couple things like, well, I can't afford all this expensive equipment, so it seems like it makes perfect sense to go to a makerspace, and it does. I'm not arguing that it's not a good place to start. I think you just need to be aware of the fact that as you start to succeed, you will very quickly outgrow that in terms of what your business is actually going to need to continue to succeed. Because now, I talk about SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, as you grow, these weaknesses in the chinks in the armor in the makerspace become more of a threat to your business, right? I want to pause a sec and highlight a comment in the chat. Ethan Coulter talks about a library where he is that has a makerspace, and it figured out an interesting way to do online classes with physical items. For the library is mostly targeted to people that can swing by and pick up a box. This model can work as a shipment style too. After everyone gets their box, everyone jumps on a Zoom. So how are you? That's interesting. So the way I'm interpreting that is like the people
Like
can actually
subscription box style stuff.
subscription box style stuff. Maybe there's some opportunity for like distribution, but these are and physical distribution, take thing and pack and ship for them. I mean, a library is not designed to do those things. That's the other thing we didn't get into. Like a lot of these spaces kind of come about to like maintain relevancy of something, in a current day and age, right? A library has had to like become a computer lab and a maker space and all this stuff because nobody's going in there and just checking out and reading books anymore. And how that makes you feel is a whole nother, story, but
I'm writing a book, so I feel pretty strongly about it.
yeah, but I mean, like we're already working at a disadvantage with a lot of these things because it's like there's no defined business model. There's nobody that wants to handle all the administrative stuff. It all sounds good, like Andrew's saying, like, oh, this is great. We can do distribution. We can sell storage space. We can yeah, of course. There's tons of revenue opportunities, but like, what's the growth lever? What's the success thing over time? You kind of got to pick one or two, right? What are you thinking?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think, the library example is really interesting because that's a model we thought about, right? Because we were 90% of the way to kits, but then you're limited by the sorts of things you can do. So you can solder, you can do Arduino stuff, you can somewhat 3D print, although usually you have to go like, that's kind of weird. You can assemble kits. And so there's definitely like, I think the libraries, that's a perfect thing you can do. Now that said, I've spoken to a couple librarians who run these spaces and I said, what's it like? And the response I got from my very limited sample was, I don't spend very much time in there. And so therefore I don't know much about it. It's like just another aspect of what I have to do. So they may spend 4 hours a week. And I am not speaking on behalf of all libraries. I've spoken to a couple people, but the feeling that I got was we don't have enough time to figure out how this stuff works, to figure out a model that works to, I think if one library could champion that and then sell their kits to the rest of the library system and just say, hey, we're going to build the system alongside of one another. And we're all going to use the same tools, the same materials, the same supplies, the same suppliers. And we're going to really like get order lists down and storage down and we're going to teach you how to do this. Like, I think that's an awesome model and it's totally doable. And also you could do that at the library too. Come and take the kit home or come and just like, kind of like, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of like a Chipotle style makerspace. Come in, like grab your stuff.
I'd
like,
love to get a burrito while I was doing my making too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I love that idea. I think like all things makerspace, it comes down to how well can you execute it given the constraints you have.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that if like that's another side of this is like I think a lot of institutions are overly willing to contribute money towards equipment stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they're under committed to development.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
hey, you need
Human
people in here
resources.
like
Yeah.
showing you how to operate this stuff, working on it on a daily basis. And like a lot of maker spaces, this comes back to kind of a failure of maker spaces too. A lot of maker spaces that aren't formal enough will have the local woodworking guy in there teaching classes. There's no paperwork, there's no
Yep.
consistency, there's no supplies ready to go. It's just one guy
Right.
who's lugging stuff back and forth in his truck, and when he leaves, that's done.
That's right.
So
Yep.
there's no reproducibility. So like one thing I can say about the place I was at is we were fanatical about reproducibility. So I think love the idea of shipping kits home from a library. That's an awesome, awesome thing. But I think it comes down to how well you can keep it organized. Who's actually in charge of doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Question mark. At
Ownership
least,
and organization, 100%.
Yep.
yeah.
You know, the equipment, this is true for any business too. The assets are the easy part,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Even though
Mhm.
when you look at it, it's like, yeah, I know that sounds
Yep.
like flippant to say, like $100,000
No,
piece of
that's great.
equipment, but it's like, yeah, when you get money and buying stuff, it's great. It's the human element, the human resources component that is just what you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna live or die by. Like a lot, especially when you're getting started, right? Like if you don't
Yep.
have a good team that owns it, that is willing to do the admin, that's willing to be the junkyard dog that gets in there and be like, you got to clean up your space. It cannot be this way. You get, you know, there have to be repercussions for not abiding, because you're managing a physical community of people with all kinds of different needs and expectations. I've always said I would never want to do it. I think if I was doing something very specific, and we haven't really gotten into this, I don't know what your experience is in it, but when we talk about an incubator, something that is specific to business, where it's like, this whole thing exists to make money. This is a for-profit entity, and we are here to nurture other businesses to get their start. An accelerator, an incubator, we've heard them called multiple
Mm-hmm.
things. I think there is a model where that can work, but given the requirements of many businesses, especially those that are making things, right, product-based businesses, I
Mm-hmm.
think at first, like Andrew was saying, the notion of monetizing, like, well, if I get the laser and I can share, because I only, you know, I have capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rental car model or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
It sounds great, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately you're gonna, like, there's ego involved. You get people that are like, I'm an engineer, I can work anything, and then they break it, and then who owns it
Mm-hmm.
and who has to pay to fix it,
Classic. Yeah.
right? So I wonder if there is a model, if there is a success model potentially, where there are common tool sets, 3D printing, CNC, you know, there are some
Mm-hmm.
pretty good low-hanging fruit, but it's like, do those machines need to be managed by like a trained operator? Like, do you set it up like a job shop that then the
Mm-hmm.
members get priority access to getting quoted for, but they're still paying, and they're not the ones that are using the machine, and they're not the ones that maintain the machine. So it's really just kind of a priority queue, job
Mm-hmm.
shop kind of thing, if that makes sense. I don't know. What do you think? Is that anything you guys have seen or heard before? Is there something to that?
I've actually heard of something similar. So back when, in my previous life with my previous startup, we were building hardware server appliances. And, as I've mentioned many times before, we were, private equity and then venture backed. So, we went out, we raised money.
Sure.
As a part of those pitches, we actually were out, in the, Bay Area, kind of, West Coast where Silicon Valley, exists,
The
and there
Sandhill
were a few
Shuffle.
like
Yep.
yeah, there were a few hardware accelerators or incubators, if you will. And I believe how they actually worked, it was a really interesting model. They would invest in the company, and the investment came with basically access to their professional machinists and shops and companies that they had worked with on other companies
Uh-huh.
that they have either started. So some were like PC computer boards, some were, machinists. And basically, you would say, hey, these are the things that I'm trying to develop. and they would work, they would set up, negotiate the meetings. It wasn't like a makerspace, but it was really just like, this is how we're going to connect you, and we're going to help you build this up and turn this into a functioning business.
I
So it was like a step removed, if you will.
Well, and I think
Hmm.
that's like a really important, like the the difficult thing with building physical products is usually
Hmm.
not making the product. Like
Hmm.
I view that as kind of a solvable problem. Like there
Yeah.
are
Hmm.
definitely some very complex.
Oh,
I don't
sure.
mean to say that it applies to everything, but the vast majority of the issues I saw when it came to trying to make a business that works in some kind of physical hardware is
Hmm.
business.
Yep.
What, nice, you have your product, but like, do you have distribution?
Yeah.
How are you going
Hmm.
to sell this? Have you
Yeah.
written the copy? Do you have a website? What around, like, you've done 10% of the work, let's say.
Yeah.
The other
Hmm.
90% is all the stuff that's in the background that
Yeah.
actually pertains to trying to run a business. And that's way different. And so I think we got a
100%.
lot of folks who came in really wide-eyed, right? Ah, I'm going to do it, right? And now I've got access to the
And
equipment.
yeah.
And they very often left disappointed, I think, and I didn't even always get to have those
Yeah.
conversations, primarily because it's like, oh wow, well I can make it, but like now I made a thing. Like how do I go from made
Hmm.
thing to
Yep.
I say that
that
all the
person
time.
over there is
Making
going to
one thing and
buy
making
that thing?
10,000 things is a completely different animal.
Yeah,
And
so it's almost like you can find access to the equipment,
yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure the
Hmm.
equipment is a limiting factor there. And then, I've just also not seen it. I know Tim Keller of Inventopia is kind of doing something like that. I would put his in this category. And he's got a wet lab, which is really interesting. So he's got a bio lab and he's got a
I've
bunch
been
of
there.
Hmm.
bio-based
I've
companies
met
in
him.
there.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. And
Yeah.
so I would call him, I would say of the people doing it, he's one of them. And he's never paid himself. He just
Hmm.
operates this thing because he really enjoys it. And I'm like,
Yep.
oops,
Hmm.
that's gonna burn you out at some point, right? Like he makes
Yeah.
his money developing his own products,
That was a
which
really
is
unique
again,
space when we were doing the face shield production thing. I went down there and they were doing some of that stuff as well, and it was completely different from anything I'd ever walked into.
totally,
Yeah, so it was neat. Yeah, shout out Tim.
yeah.
Um, let me hit a couple more things, comments and questions for you guys to get your thoughts. David Wheeler, hey David, good to see you. Asks, is there a way to operate a makerspace that's more focused, not trying to cater to everyone? So we just kind of talked about one thing in
Hmm.
terms of like focusing on business. What's another subset of a maker group if you're trying to focus on a maker space? Maybe call, Andrew I think alluded to, like there's a hacker space model. Like to me, when I hear hacker space, I'm thinking more software, electronics development, kind of that kind of thing. That's a I won't
Hmm.
say completely different, because there's obviously on the Venn diagram of makers, like a lot of what makes us makers is that
Oh, yes.
like massive overlap of Venn diagrams, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Hmm.
we it's part of what makes the space endearing, that it's like, oh, it's got a cool electronics lab. It's like it's what we all wish that our lab, our space could be in our garage, where it's like, I got my
Hmm.
wood shop, I got my metal shop, I got my, I'm like,
Mm.
but really I'm not going to use all those things. So if we're talking about focusing though, are we better off not trying to be everything to everyone and catering to specific needs? So we talked about business. What's another segment that there might be a successful, sustainable model for? I think business, because I'm like, money makes the world go round. We need that income to keep this
Hmm.
thing going. But it's not the only way. There's obviously other things. But I don't know, Josh, what's your experience been with that?
I think there's an insatiable appetite for kids classes,
Classes, so
kids
education,
specifically,
kids specific.
because
Yes.
this was pulled out of schools. This was pulled out of people that make things understand the value of it, and even people that don't make things also understand the value of it, right? Like at the end of the day,
Hmm.
we're all makers. You make something. You cook. Everybody makes
Yep.
something. So we know the importance of it, and I know parents are eager to put their money towards their kids' education.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's not very space intensive, 1 to 2,000 square feet, and scaled down facilities, everything on wheels. And you could jam out some pretty successful youth programs. I think youth programs is where I would focus if I were building something
Hmm.
specific.
I like that.
And I would start with the things like every kid's favorite class tends to be woodshop. Right?
Yep.
Get them in
Hmm.
woodshop and just run 12 weeks of woodshop classes inside a small facility or a parking lot, right? You put some easy ups up and you wheel your equipment out and you have a generator and you've got yourself a woodshop in a parking lot. And maybe that's tied to a museum. So you don't like thinking outside of like, do I need space? That's one thought I have in terms of focus on stuff. I think there's a lot of also like electronics lab, robotics. People want to come in and tinker in that very specific way. It's not very equipment intensive.
Right.
You don't need you could probably just rent without buying a facility. You could probably just rent space once or twice a week and start with some classes and just get people together and making stuff and seeing kind of where it goes from there. So electronics is easy to scale. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right on the kids classes. Like we here in St. Louis have this organization called the Magic House, and it's literally just a
I want
bunch
to
of
go.
science experiments. That's it, and it's
Yeah.
really targeted for kids. And the reason why our makerspace exists now is because they focused on really that education piece. And so our makerspace is at the bottom floor of what they call, I think it's made at the Magic House. And it's, this place where you can take your children to, and they have those classes. They have all sorts of experiments that the children can run and be involved with. And then as they're growing and educating themselves, there's the makerspace down below. And we've seen, it hasn't been around long enough to see that perfect transition yet, but there are definitely the older kids on the spectrum, in the high school, where they're starting to branch out and use the laser cutter downstairs or whatever it might be for their little projects. So
And they're
I
very
absolutely agree.
capable. But
Mhm.
actually,
Yeah.
this is really, and I know, Josh, I know we're starting to run long, so we'll be
Fine.
respectful of time.
Yeah,
Just want
I'm
to,
enjoying
just
this.
wanted to. We always do because we get into the conversation.
Yeah.
And the chat's starting to fly too. One thing I
Nice.
wanted to just ping really quick, which I think is good. When we were talking about focus, Ethan says, okay, it's decided I'm going to get super specific and do a droid depot. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that is a cool idea, right?
Heck
Like
yeah, man. That's
when we go,
definitely.
Yeah.
when we go to these cons now, I mean, there are whole
So, yeah.
communities of people that are just droid building, and it is
Mhm.
awesome, right?
Awesome.
It resonates. It's
Yep.
like you get to the top of your level, you can get into like prop building and do professionally for Hollywood and stuff.
Amazing.
That is a fantastic thing to focus on, and
And
there
can I
is a
just say
ton of
too
space
that like
there.
as
Yeah.
you scale these education programs,
Yeah.
right? Like I had to end up trying to hire instructors that knew wood, metal, laser. Nobody knows all that stuff. I had the former chief designer at Mazda came in. He was in his
Ooh.
60s. I hired him, and he was still drinking from the fire hose, and he's done this stuff his whole life. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, there just aren't people who, for the most part, there aren't people who have all these skills. So if you can focus down on one in particular,
Yeah.
it simplifies everything. And
Yeah.
it also you know how this goes. The deeper you go, the broader it becomes.
Right.
So
Right.
it can become everything.
Right.
But if you
Yep.
start narrow and go deep, I think that's better than
Yep.
starting broad and trying to
Yeah.
then narrow down as you go.
Mhm.
Certainly
I
less
completely agree with
brain
that. The kid specific education is brilliant. I'd love to hear if you guys have come across places that do it well. Britt in the chat is saying like, NYC will throw money at all kinds of kids education programs. So there's money for it. It's obviously a huge market, right? Like parents will spend insane amounts of money to supplement their kids' education and experience. And when you get hands on with stuff, I mean, it's great. The other thing is kids are way more moldable. Like if I'm thinking about like putting a space together and managing the ones that are in it, and if they're kids, they're gonna be, and again, you're gonna have punks and stuff, but they're more moldable. They're more malleable. They're more trainable. If you're instilling good organization and values and safety protocol and all of that stuff, you're going to have a much easier time probably with that than you would with adults. Josh, what do you think? What are your thoughts on that? You've worked with both subsets. It's tough when you get into people that are just a little bit more like, I know how to do this. There's a lot more ego in the adult space.
Yeah, there's tons of ego in the adults, and I think that's the trick as an adult is to try to, if you got to put yourself back in the kid mindset, right? The beginner's mindset kind of thing, right? But it's very hard to do. I think, kids are definitely moldable and curious, and they're all. I mean, the nice thing about those programs is they're there because they really want to be there.
Yep.
Adult side of it, usually you're taking a class because you have to, or the other side of it is there are a subset of folks who take classes because they're genuinely interested. So we handled that. We'd have sign-off classes, and then we'd have skill builder classes, and those were two very distinct categories.
Yeah.
Sign
Okay.
off classes, I just need to get through this and understand how this operates inside of this space and get to know not just the machinery and get signed off by the instructor, but like how does this all really work,
Yeah.
right? So if you get signed off 3 hours, you're done. But the other side of that was skill builders, and for the skill builders, those folks were always interested,
Yeah.
and they had that beginner's mindset. They were really curious, and so I
Yeah.
think it just depended on what you came in with.
Right. Mike.
I
Mike in the.
think
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think, kind of expanding on the education courses, like
Yeah.
one of the cool things here in St. Louis, we also have things for adults specifically targeted at adults. I think it's I'm not sure if it's a chain or like a large organization, but they're called the Craft Alliance. And what they do is they actually have classes where you can go and learn how to do pottery, where you can do woodworking, you can do, wood turning, that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
And these are like 12, 16-week long courses, kind of like a trade, if you will, where you go in and, they will teach you one-on-one, and I see that just continuing to expand. Like I think they announced that they're like opening up even more classes because, like makers, like we want to learn, and we just don't know exactly where to start. We have this idea, and I think that having this foundation to basically, this is the path, we're going to go through these steps, and then at
Yeah.
the end of it, you're going to hopefully have a new skill.
Yeah.
I think that's incredible.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things all in the same line here that I want to hit on really quick. Mike, never let the
Yeah.
machine win. Shout out, Mike. Says rent and insurance costs have ended a lot of maker spaces in this area.
I have something to say about that.
And I think let me get there, and I think
Yeah.
let's see if we come to the same space.
Yeah.
And I've seen the mobile thing. Okay, the food truck model, and you talked about it more closer to the top of the show.
I have something to say about that too.
Yeah. And when we think about especially kids education too, a lot of times a great way is like, how do you get in with the schools, right? So it's like we've seen all kinds of interesting programs, and there's all kinds of hunger for extracurriculars and stuff in partnerships in your local schools for having additional curriculum that's outside of what they might do. Is a mobile variant of this viable, or maybe some combination of the two? What are your thoughts there, Josh?
Yeah, I don't think so. I ran and operated a mobile makerspace that we did woodshop. Well, we did everything we did in the shop. We did on our mobile makerspace,
Okay.
and it nearly broke me.
It nearly broke you. Okay, so elaborate.
Insanely challenging.
Okay,
because,
tell us why.
I'm driving a truck and a 40-foot trailer, right? So I'm driving a truck, a trailer, hooking it up in the morning. I'm having to load up all the tools and supplies the night before.
Physically
We're teaching
intensive.
about 100 kids throughout
Okay.
the course of the day.
Okay.
And it's all outside. That was 2 days a week.
Okay.
And I'd probably get up at 5 in the morning, and I wouldn't get home till 6:30, 7 o'clock at night.
Okay.
And it was back to back to back classes with a little break for lunch, 10 minutes in between. And it was as hard and as fast as I could work
Wow.
to try to keep up with it. And it's expensive.
Okay.
Right. So who pays for it?
Yep.
Is question number one. Like, it definitely didn't make a
Mhm.
business sense for us to drive a truck and trailer out to teach for an hour to make $100.
No, of
It's
course
like,
not.
we need to make we need to be able to pay everybody, pay the overhead that goes into sustaining this program, supporting the tools, doing all those sorts of things, and then make a profit on top of that.
Yeah.
So in terms of the profit model of that,
Yeah.
not so viable, in my opinion. And I
So-
think if you could find a way to put, and this is something that I've been noodling around in my head with for a little while, but if you could find a way to put down just, I'm going to plop a wood shop down in your parking lot, right? Like, let's put a temporary structure up, or a permanent structure. Let's get a shipping container, pack it with tools and supplies, and bring the local guy in to teach classes here in the afternoons. Like, that's a sustainable model because you're not carrying things back and forth all the time, but it still needs somebody to stock it
Sure.
and operate it. But I think the mobile model, at least the way that we ran it, trying to run like really robust classes, I did it for 5 years, like twice a week for 5 years. It was very challenging. We ended up closing that arm of the business down. I think they did just after I left. COVID kind of destroyed it. We just
Interesting.
didn't have the numbers to justify, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, we needed about 100 kids a day charging what we were charging, which was for a series of 12 classes, it was like $500 a kid, something
Yeah.
like 450, something like
Yeah.
that.
So more
Um,
more of an after school or something
no, that was
that's
during.
not
So that was with homeschoolers. So we would go and we would
okay.
plop it down at a sort of like a homeschool campus where they'd invite vendors in
Yep.
and then invite right. And we'd set up there, and that was like the only place that we had enough distribution to justify. And I got interest over the years. Hey,
Sure.
can you bring it here? Hey, can we do that? And I always had to be like, I'm so sorry, but it doesn't work with 20 kids. I can't do it.
Right.
You know,
So
it doesn't.
I'm hearing a couple of interesting things about that, and I'm wondering too, like one, the tool set that you choose. So if you're going with wood shop, like these are big, heavy equipment, and you need a variety a lot of the time. I've done a couple things, and again, this was just more for like I was donating my time, but it's like I brought a couple printers that I could throw in the back of my
Yeah,
car,
yeah.
brought into a class, and did that for my kids and stuff like that. And obviously that was so maybe there's subsets in a different way, but obviously focusing on like is there budget allocated to this, like the homeschooling thing is interesting because my kids did do that, and there's a lot of money that's allocated for, because it's designed to be a broad curriculum and not focused on being in the classroom. The way that the dollars are divided up for that is a little bit different. So building the business case for that, I think, is like finding the right customer. Like just going to a public school, who if they don't have budget allocated for this, like it's not going to work. Versus some of these homeschooling programs where they're like, yeah, we do have stuff carved out for different types of learning opportunities. So that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that experience, because I think it's one of those things that we all think, oh, that sounds awesome, food truck model. When I was in Prague, it sounds sexy, right? It sounds really great. When I was in Prague at Maker Faire Prague 2018 or 19 now, there was one of those that it was just the 3D printing truck. The doors opened up, tailgate folded down. There's a couple printers in there, and it was like, yeah, you could walk through it and all that stuff. It was kind of neat. I don't know how it's really, if it was monetized or if it was just more of a thing that somebody was showing off. If it's something that's usable to you and you can transport it, or if it's a means of bringing people into your facility. So is it more sales, marketing, outreach, and awareness? There's some value there. So it just kind of depends on how you're modeling that structure. Maybe, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I haven't seen a lot of long-term successful models there.
Well,
but again, I'm limited. I'm here in California, and I'm trying to
Totally.
broaden my scope. So
Totally.
no offense to people who are like, I'm running a very successful one. I'm
No,
sure
no,
it
no.
can work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think it works even like as an advertising channel. It's really interesting,
Yeah.
right? Like it does get eyeballs on stuff. If again, this idea of a loss leader, if you're a company or if you're a school or if you're a district or you're something like that, and you're trying to do the new shiny fun thing,
Yep.
then you may need to take a loss on some of this stuff and recognize that it's part of the marketing budget and not part of the operations.
That's
budget.
exactly right. That's exactly right. We've talked about that on other aspects of our business too. Like I sold filament. I still do. We're almost done with it now, but like that's always been a loss leader for me. We use that as our Trojan horse to sell the containers and stuff, the storage boxes, right? So it's like I'll sell filament at cost, basically, just so I can slap a sticker on it that says, hey, you got the filament now, like, protect it with the rep box or something like that.
Yeah.
But you have to have that mentality, and you're exactly right. This is a marketing advertising line item. This is not an income stream necessarily. So
and you can offset some of those costs. You can definitely run classes out of it. But I think going in with the mentality that this is maybe not going to be the most profitable thing we do.
Right.
I've been thinking about this idea of like different distinct styles of making in a box. Like if you could just order it, plop it down, bang, here's what you need: tools, materials, supplies, and everything.
Yeah.
And then
shop in a
you
box.
identify the instructor, and now you're a high school and you've got a wood shop back on campus because it's all built for you.
I've had this exact conversation in the past. The containers, everything is containerized, but the idea of like like where you can pre-wire it, you can do all the ducting, the venting, the electrical, all that stuff, and then you can have wood shop in a box, you can have 3D printing in a box, you can have and then it can be modular. I love modular stuff, but obviously the capex for that, to get that started and all that stuff is massive. I think it's a cool idea. I'll bet you anything we start seeing it at some point.
Yeah. I've seen some. I'm actually already starting to see some early iterations of it with a couple of shops I've been talking with. So
that's cool. I'd love to hear more about that in the future, because I think that's got great application, not just in like anybody that might just want to plop a prefabbed shop down and not have to make their own, But when we talk about distributed manufacturing and how great that could be, I mean, our world runs on containers, right? And so if you can literally set up distributed fabrication where it's like everybody's using a unified tool set, plop down my printer box, one over at Andrew's neighborhood and all that stuff, and then now we've got manufacturing as close as possible to where product needs to be. I think there's all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, I've got a couple of my friends run Vantopia, and they actually have a very successful business out of a makerspace, and they do CNC van build kits, and they've just built out a CNC truck. So they're like, they've actually built some robust. They're like, hey, what if worst case scenario, this place closes down, or they're whatever, right? The CNC breaks,
drive down the road,
all the things that you talked about, right? So they put it all in a truck, and they're building out a mobile CNC unit that they can just run out of a truck.
We see it in healthcare. A lot of the like MRI systems are out of trailers and stuff
MRI,
like that.
CT scans.
Yeah. And so I think there's definitely room for stuff like that. Like, again, like bite off a little bit less, do something very specific.
Focus.
Like, that's interesting.
No, it's really interesting. Well, listen, I know we could go on forever on this, but we got to let people go about their days. Josh, I want to thank you big time for sharing your experience. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We're going to have you back on as we get closer to book launch so we can talk more about CAD work and stuff like that. I mean, we could just chat forever. Everybody in the chat, if you're still with us, thank you so much. If I didn't get to call out your comment or your question, I apologize. It's always a juggling act, trying to stay involved in the conversation.
You're better than I can't do that.
But
I can't even look.
But we do appreciate you. We do appreciate you being here and your thoughts and your commentary. It just makes it fun and interesting and educational for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And we will be back yet again. So don't fear. We're going to stop now, but we'll be back next Friday. We're going to have, I'll tease it right now. We're going to have David Shorey with us. Prolific designer, amazing maker. He's getting involved in some hardcore AI model training, custom application stuff around Stable Diffusion. That guy is just amazing. He's always got his hands in some interesting stuff. So we're going to dive in on some AI stuff next week, which is going to be awesome. And then we've got a great lineup coming up in May and June as well, from a lot of the people we've talked to at some of the events. Andrew and I will be briefly at Rapid next week. Oh, nice. So if anybody in the Chicago area is going to be at Rapid, please, come find me and say hi. We're looking forward to that. That's more of an industrial additive conference and stuff at McCormick Place. So shout out to the Rapid team for that. That's going to be awesome.
Yep.
And we will catch all the rest of you maker extraordinaires hopefully on the next one. Everybody have a fantastic weekend. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye.